Hey guys, I'm the Metal Jesus, and today I want to share a really cool find with you. So raise your hand if you're old enough to remember a time being stuck in your favorite Nintendo game and having to call them for help. That certainly happened to me actually. When I had a Super Nintendo, I had Final Fantasy III, I was stuck, and at the time I had to call Nintendo's Powerline and talk to a gameplay counselor just to get unstuck, just to continue on with my game. Now, this is certainly a time before most of us had the internet and of course sites like Game FAQs. So what was found was the actual gameplay counselor guide that they would use to help all of us. This is around the time of the late 80s and early 90s. So there's a lot of Nintendo games and Super Nintendo games in here. But what's really cool is that there are a ton of hand-drawn maps. There's notes, there's instructions from the team members to help people, and a bunch more info. And as a special bonus, what also was found at the same time was a 1989 official Nintendo employee handbook. So I'm going to show you guys both of these in this video. Let's take a look. The first thing that I notice is just how incredibly heavy this thing is, because it's packed full of over 60 games. Now the crazy thing is that there's no table of contents, but it does start with the A's. Wait, you're probably thinking, what? No, Zelda 2? Well, that's because it's filed under Adventures of Link. Same thing with also Adventures of LOLO 2. These pages are a great example of how this guide was built by the team members using their own hand-drawn maps and notes. Now you may notice that these are photocopied, and that's because the story goes, depending on what they needed, a particular person on the team would create these and then do photocopies for the rest of the team. Everybody worked together to help each other out. This Breath of Fire map is an example of how they would sometimes use color, although this looks like it might be a photocopy from, say, a strategy guide. But this Castlevania II map definitely looks hand-drawn. Now I could be mistaken, but I don't recognize it. The Crystalis page is pretty cool because at the bottom there's a shout out to the people who actually made it. In this case, somebody named Casey Pelkey and Matt Alderman. Check out these hand-drawn color maps for the game, and notice in the lower right is a signature by the person who made it. Next up is Dragon Warrior 3. When you turn the page, there's something pretty cool. It's a note to the gameplay counselor to check out the notes and enjoy playing the game, like have fun. For Dragon Warrior 4, there's a note saying that they took elements from the strategy guide, but they really recommend that the counselor play the game to best help the caller. Can you imagine working at Nintendo at this time, getting paid to basically play these games and be an expert at helping people get through them? I mean, talk about awesome. Here's a nice colored map for the game Fester's Quest. Now, I could be wrong, but this looks like it might come from Nintendo Power Magazine. You turn the page and you're greeted with this, what looks like a hand-drawn dragon for the game Final Fantasy Legend. And here's a game that stumped me all those years ago when I had to call Nintendo. Final Fantasy III. Yes, I was stuck. Oh my God. And I made the call over to Redmond and they helped me, so it worked. Here are some maps for the game Golgo 13. This is a pretty tough game, so I could probably use these. Here is Lagoon for the Super Nintendo. Now there's an interesting note here where it says that they couldn't get the color maps needed when this guide was made, which I thought was pretty interesting because it kind of highlights that the developers and also the gameplay counselors were not necessarily working together. And so sometimes they really had to improvise and just do the best job that they could with what they had. Here is one of the craziest maps in the entire guide. This is for the game Legacy of the Wizard. Now, look at this. Basically, it's every location of the shops, but it's all jammed into this one page. I don't know exactly how useful this is, but that is a mess. Let's turn a couple pages, and here is the original NES version of Legend of Zelda, the classic. A couple pages further is a link to the past, but check this out. The following maps are temporary maps provided to help you work through the game. Nintendo Power will have an in-depth strategy guide that will be more than sufficient for helping consumers. Pretty cool, huh? The gameplay counselors would also have to help people with the Game Boy, so let's jump right into Zelda Link's Awakening. Another note here saying, sorry, we don't have really detailed maps, but that's okay because your job is to jump in and play the game and be the expert yourself. Here are more hand-drawn maps, this time for Metroid 2. Here is one of the pages that would be very helpful if you happen to be playing the sequel to Metal Gear, and that is called Snake's Revenge. Here is a hand-drawn map for the game Solstice. The level design in the Metroid games are always complicated, so I'm sure this map helped that gameplay counselor quite a bit. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games are always popular, and here are a couple pages from that. Most of these pages are pretty cool because they include these hand-drawn characters. Now, I don't know if these come from the manual or the strategy guide or if they are created by the team, but if you're a fan, they're pretty neat. Ultima 6 is kind of neat because it has a note that says, these maps are copied directly from the Ultima 6 cluebook for the PC, but all the maps work for the Super Nintendo as well. This is kind of neat because it shows that basically they would take information from wherever they could get it to best help the consumer. And probably one of my favorite things in the entire book is this note included with the game Willow. Okay, no longer will you have to cope with the Japanese makeshift maps for Willow. Here is a condensed but accurate version of Willow in its entirety. These maps are very cool, but somewhat chaotic. But if you take the time to color them, they work great. Note, before you freak out or rip the cloth off your seats, always examine the maps and familiarize yourself with the area before answering any questions with these maps. Thanks. Wow. Okay, so obviously this game was tough to support. So that's a quick look at the guide that the Nintendo gameplay counselors would use pretty much every day to do their job. It's a real insight into what that job would have been like. So very cool, huh? Now, as promised, of course, here is the official Nintendo Employee Handbook and Policies from 1989. It's my understanding that this type of book would be given to a new Nintendo employee. The first page reads, Nintendo of America, Regulations and Employment Policies effective November 1st, 1989. Here is the table of contents. Now, I'm not going to run through everything because honestly, a lot of this is very similar to pretty much every other big corporate tech company. And here is a formal introduction letter talking about some of the things that are going to be important to the new employee. And down at the bottom, it's signed by the current president at the time. I'm going to skip ahead a bit here because a lot of this stuff is written by attorneys and it's fairly standard stuff. But towards the back of it, you get something interesting, which is an organization chart. Here you see the hierarchy of exactly how Nintendo of America was organized. And then one page further, you get what looks like a very detailed organization chart of pretty much every single person that worked at Nintendo of America at this time and in what section or division they were in. This is pretty amazing and pretty detailed. Now, unfortunately, it's a bit hard to read at times, but keep in mind, this is a very old document. Another cool set of finds that happened here in the Seattle area. For those of you that don't know, Nintendo of North America does have their headquarters in the Puget Sound area. So that's the reason why some of these things keep popping up. And speaking of, I know there has to be a bunch of ex-Nintendo gameplay counselors out there. If you are, I'd love to hear from you because I know that you also got a really kick-ass jacket while working there. I'd love to either see it in person or maybe add it to my collection. So if you are an ex-Nintendo employee that has one of those, I'd love to hear about it. If not even add it to my collection, maybe just show it off on camera, because from what I've seen in pictures, they seem really, really cool. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing, and take care. I want to give a huge shout out to my buddy Emilio, who let me borrow these for this video. These actually walked into his retro store. Somebody sold them. You know, the crazy stuff that you find here in the Seattle area. It's amazing, and so I'm very glad that he let me borrow them, again, for this video, because it's such an interesting find and such a cool piece of Nintendo history. All right, guys, thanks very much for watching.